What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, former two-division world champion, legendary Hall of Famer, Timothy Desert Storm Bradley, who turned colorful analyst for ESPN and Top Rank. Timothy Bradley weighs in on the possibility of undefeated three-division world champion, former junior welterweight undisputed world champion, currently the WBO welterweight world champion, who is widely considered the number one pound-for-pound boxer in the world, Terrence Bud Crawford, who happens to be a friend of Timothy Bradley, and he happens to fight on Timothy Bradley's network. Terrence Crawford fights on ESPN. It's publicized that they have a close friendship. And Timothy Bradley is talking about the possibility of the mega showdown between Terrence Crawford and undefeated, unified WBC, IBF welterweight world champion superstar boxer Errol Spence Jr. Timothy Bradley completely goes in on Errol Spence Jr. He rips Errol Spence Jr. He says that Errol Spence Jr., when the fight was mentioned, what fight do you want to see in 2021? What's the fight that you most want to see? Andre Ward responded by saying that he has a close relationship with both guys, Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence. He stated that he's not picking or choosing a side. He stated that, it's about who wants to fight more, and this is the fight he most wants to see in 2021. Timothy Bradley cuts him off and said, nope, not gonna happen. And he completely placed the entire blame on Errol Spence's doorstep, dismissing everything that's taken place with legendary promoter, Top Rank CEO, who promoted himself in Bob Arum and Arum's comments. He completely dismissed the fact that Terrence Crawford stated that he wanted 60-40 in favor of himself because of the accomplishments that he accomplished. All of that went out the window for Timothy Bradley. Timothy Bradley says, why is Errol Spence talking about going up and fighting Canelo Alvarez? He says, I don't believe that he would even go up to fight Canelo Alvarez. He said, why would he go up and fight Canelo Alvarez if he's not even willing to fight Terrence Crawford? He stated that at this point in time, it's abundantly clear what Errol Spence's agenda is. It's abundantly clear what his goal is. And his goal is to completely, at this point in time, collect as much money as possible and get out of the sport. He's looking to cash out at this point in time. He's not looking to have legacy fights or fight the best. He's just looking simply to cash out and get out the sport. End quote. Well, I have to completely beg to differ. And before I end quote, let me just get to this. Another thing he stated is that he stated that Errol Spence just simply don't want to fight Terrence Crawford. He stated that Errol Spence, even if Terrence Crawford was to somehow jump ship, leave ESPN and Top Rank, sign with the PBC, Premier Boxing Champions, with advisor and founder Al Heyman, the fight still will never happen because Errol Spence simply does not want to fight the best. End quote. Wow. This is Timothy Bradley completely dismissing the fact that Errol Spence says, let's negotiate 60-40 in my favor and we can make the fight. And Terrence Crawford says, it's got to be 60-40 in my favor, 50-50 at best, or there is no fight. That is an offer made on the part of Errol Spence Jr. Timothy Bradley completely dismissed the fact that Terrence Crawford is saying that he needs the big money or the fight is not going to happen. 50-50 split in his favor, 60-40 split in his favor, or 50-50 down the middle, or the fight don't happen. That means that the offer that Errol Spence is making is being completely dismissed by Timothy Bradley as if he's not even making an offer, as if he's not even mentioning Terrence Crawford. When he just did an interview with Brian Kenny on DAZN, when Canelo Alvarez faced Caleb Smith, he was asked about Terrence Crawford, that being Errol Spence, and Errol Spence stated that a fight with Terrence Crawford could definitely happen in 2021, but it has to be a 60-40 split in my favor because the numbers don't lie. I'm doing the bigger pay-per-view numbers, which is not even debatable because he did 350,000 pay-per-view buys with Mikey Garcia, 325,000 pay-per-view buys with Sean Porter, and reportedly to do 310,000 pay-per-view buys with Danny Garcia. And you add those numbers up, okay? and you have nearly 1 million pay-per-view buys from Errol Spence Jr. And then you add Terrence Crawford's 2 pay-per-views with Amir Khan and Victor Postile. Amir Khan 150,000 pay-per-views and Victor Postile 60,000 pay-per-views. That's combined 210,000 pay-per-views. So the numbers don't lie. And his last 3 fights, he fought 3 Hall of Famers on pay-per-view back to back to back. Mikey Garcia is going to go in the Hall of Fame. Sean Porter is going to go in the Hall of Fame. And Danny Garcia is going to go into the Hall of Fame. Where Errol Spence is doing all the heavy lifting, Terrence Crawford in his last 5 fights, yes, he got dramatic stoppage victories, exciting, but Terrence Crawford has yet to fight a Hall of Famer, as he already stated, and he admitted when he sat down with Andre Ward on an ESPN special called Relentless, and he stated that he's yet to secure a mega, massive, lucrative payday or legacy fight with the Hall of Famer. And that's something he's seeking to do before his career is over. This is something he admitted. But we know Errol Spence went to the UK. The best fighter on Terrence Crawford's resume to date is Kell Brook, former IBF welterweight world champion British superstar boxer, which was Terrence Crawford's last fight. And we know 3.5 years ago, 2017, Errol Spence went to the UK when Kell Brook was still a world champion in hostile environment and stopped Kell Brook in the 10th round and broke his other orbital bone that he suffered a right orbital bone break against Gennady Golovkin, that being Kell Brook 9 months prior, and he broke the left one against Errol Spence. And Errol Spence dethroned him as the champion in his backyard in the UK, where Terrence Crawford fought Kell Brook in the United States in Vegas with 0 fans in attendance. Errol Spence did it with 60,000 screaming UK British fans, hostile environment, when Kell Brook was a champion. When Terrence Crawford did it, Kell Brook hadn't been a welterweight in 3.5 years since he lost that fight to Errol Spence Jr. in 2017. He hasn't been in a lucrative big fight since that fight with Errol Spence Jr. High profile fight. He hasn't fought a high profile fighter since that fight with Errol Spence Jr. 3.5 years ago. So with that said, we know they're 2 different levels of guys. They wasn't the same guy, okay? Kell Brook cited the reason he lost to Errol Spence to begin with was the fact that he struggled to make the welterweight 147-pound limit. He moved up immediately after that, had 3 fights at 154, and then he came back down, attempted, and got back down to 147 to challenge Terrence Crawford. So we know that Kell Brook simply wasn't the same guy. He's 3.5 years older. He hasn't fought at that weight in 3.5 years. He was already stopped twice in his career. So he simply just wasn't the same guy, and he wasn't a world champion. Okay? So that's the biggest name on Terrence Crawford's resume. That's the closest guy to a Hall of Fame that Terrence Crawford has faced. Now, possibly Yuriorkis Gamboa could get into a Hall of Fame. But with that said, they have a mutual opponent in Kell Brook, and you just weigh out everything and do the comparisons, and it's just 2 different guys. Okay? So with that said, he hasn't fought a legacy Hall of Famer. And if you include Kell Brook as that guy, then you have to include Kell Brook as that guy as one more person on Errol Spence's notch on his belt as well. So he's just not in a position to catch up. And so with that said, Timothy Bradley is acting as if Errol Spence is just fighting any and everybody, just B-level and C-level fighters, just cherry picking his way through the sport of boxing. In all reality, he's fighting high quality opponents, high level opponents than Terrence Crawford. So this is the agenda that they're pushing on Errol Spence Jr. to try to get Errol Spence Jr. to just simply agree to something that's undeserving. Errol Spence deserves to get the 60-40 split in his favor because, like I said, the numbers don't lie and the opponents don't lie. So he's now fought guys like Lamont Peterson, Chris Algieri, but he's also fought guys like Mikey Garcia, Danny Garcia, and Sean Porter, and Kell Brook, all of which are higher level opponents than opponents that Terrence Crawford has faced. So for Timothy Bradley to sit on the worldwide leader in sports, the biggest sporting platform in the world, in ESPN, and tell the world that Errol Spence is simply just picking and choosing lackluster opponents and looking just to cash out and get as many paydays he can to get out the sport is simply irresponsible on the part of Timothy Bradley, who once upon a time, Errol Spence was his mandatory challenge and he turned him down because Timothy Bradley cited, when have we ever done business with the other side of the street? Meaning the PBC. So when Timothy Bradley sits on ESPN and tries to he tries to influence the casual boxing fans that don't know the ins and outs of what's actually taking place within the sport of boxing and manipulate the minds to think that Errol Spence is the one that's holding up this fight is simply irresponsible on the part of Timothy Bradley, and it's dishonest on the part of Timothy Bradley. To say that Errol Spence, coming off a 14-month layoff, coming off a unification bout September 28th against Sean Porter, winning that fight and suffering a horrific car accident just 12 days later, and then getting the first fight back being against Danny Garcia, a Hall of Famer who is still in his prime, and Timothy Bradley dares to sit there and try to manipulate the fans of the sport of boxing to believing that Errol Spence is simply cherry-picking his way through the sport of boxing for a paycheck is more than irresponsible on the part of Timothy Bradley. Dare I say it's disgusting? Because Timothy Bradley knows better. He knows better. So with that said, Errol Spence Jr. Made multiple times, he stated that if Terrence Crawford is willing to take a 60-40 split, we can make the fight happen. He said that Bob Arum, Al Heyman need to sit down, and we could definitely make the fight happen in 2021. So where does Timothy Bradley get it that Errol Spence is just looking to get a paycheck and cherry-picking his way through the sport of boxing and not looking to fight the best? When that's all he's doing is looking to fight the best since he was started to make a name for himself when he was trying to get a fight with former unified WBC, WBA, welterweight world champion, superstar boxer Keith one-time Thurman, and he wouldn't give him the opportunity. And he was trying to get Danny Garcia back then. But dare I say, Timothy Bradley dismisses the fact that Terrence Crawford, at this point in time, is still looking to land a fight with 8-division world champion, legendary, iconic Filipino superstar boxer who currently holds the WBA welterweight world champion, Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao, in a fight he has been looking to land since 2014 has been talked about. And definitely in 2015, as Terrence Crawford admitted, he's been trying to land the fight, secure that fight with Manny Pacquiao since 2015. But Bob Arum himself, the promoter himself, stated that he blocked that fight. He prevented the fight happening because he said that Manny Pacquiao was a close friend of his. He didn't want to possibly see him get hurt. And not to mention, he didn't want to pay Manny Pacquiao the big money he was looking for, $20 to $25 million, which we know Manny Pacquiao was not far off because Bob Arum then admitted that Manny Pacquiao got the $20 to $25 million to face former 4-division world champion Adrian Broner and then against Keith Thurman. And Bob Arum says he was happy that he wasn't on the hook to have to fit the bill for that amount of money for Manny Pacquiao for pay-per-view events that only did 400,000 pay-per-view buys. So Manny Pacquiao wasn't far off when he was asking for that amount of money to fight Terrence Crawford. So that's 7 years in the making. And Terrence Crawford stated that his number one priority is to secure a fight with Manny Pacquiao. But Timothy Bradley made no mention of Terrence Crawford making that his number one priority, not Errol Spence Jr. You see the agenda that's being pushed here? You see how they're trying to manipulate the fans to believe that Errol Spence is the one that don't want this fight? It's not. It's irresponsible on the part of these journalists and former boxers who turn analysts on the biggest sporting platforms in the world. But let's see how all this unfolds. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. You haven't subscribed? Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, or one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shout out to the entire LDBC. Shout out to New Media. Shout out to Black Media Row. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.